we're going to talk about a couple ways to measure how spread out data is. And the first way here is with quartiles. And so again, this is answering the question of how similar are the data. So one way before we get to quartiles to measure, or remember that spread is how similar the values are, or if you prefer to think about it, how different they are, how much variation there is. The simplest way to measure spread is just the range. And we calculate the range by taking the biggest number and subtracting the smallest number. But this ultimately only tells you about those two numbers, the biggest number and the smallest number. It doesn't tell you how the numbers are arranged in between, how the values are arranged in between. So what we introduce instead is this idea of quartiles, which we're going to start by talking about percentiles. So the pth, or it's a weird way, but the pth percentile describes the value with p% of the values at or below that value. So for example, the median would be considered the 50th percentile because it's exactly in the middle, which means that 50% of the values have to be at the median or below. The first percentile would basically be within the first few numbers, and the 99th percentile would be in the last few numbers. So if you ever hear something like from, say, SAT stuff, and they say, oh, this student is in the 80th percentile, that means 80% of the other students that took the test scored equal or lower on the exam. So now that we've talked about percentiles, we can talk about quartiles, which is a related term. So a quartile, those are the 25th, the 50th, or sorry, let me just rephrase it, 25th, and no, we do have the 50th, sorry. 50th and the 75th percentile. And these are labeled as quartile 1, quartile 2, and quartile 3, respectively. So the 25th percentile is also known as quartile 1. It's a quarter of the way through the data. And so, let me check. Yes. So the way that we then describe it is that the second quartile, which is Q2, is the median. We already talked about this. The first quartile, Q1, we said is the 25th percentile, and you find the median, and then you get rid of the median and all numbers above the median, and then you just look at what's left, find the median of that, and that's your first quartile. So if you've got, all your numbers listed out like this, if this is your median, the first quartile is just the median of this chunk of numbers, or of values. The third quartile is just the median of this second chunk of numbers. And so you'll notice it's basically, if you arrange them all in a list, biggest to smallest, Q1 occurs a quarter of the way up the list, Q2 halfway up the list, and Q3 3/4 of the way up the list. So again, the third quartile, Q3, is the 75th percentile, and it's found by taking the median of the values equal to or greater than the median. So that is the idea of quartiles. Next, we'll talk about how to use those to describe data.